In order to discuss the lore and world of Frostpunk, we must first go back to the very beginning. Before the endless snowflakes fell, before the Frostlands were all that remained, and before we lost everything. Today, we are going back to where it all started. Welcome to the Frostpunk lore series, where in today's episode we will discuss the last autumn. This video will be divided up into two sections, the first being all in-game / developer confirmed information, and the second being my own theories as to where the story and world may go in the future.
Personal Journal of Euphemia McLaughlin, Assistant Engineer at Imperial Exploration Company. It's been 5 weeks since we have left the familiar walls of Birmingham behind. Weeks of uncertainty, of struggle, of hope. And finally, we have reached the shores. We had 3 deaths so far. Or, small price for progress, as IEC called it. I can only hope I am going to avoid their fate. They've claimed there was nothing to fear, that this whole journey of ours was just a precaution. But now, it feels like the weather is changing. And the winter seems inevitable.
The British Empire is collapsing under the strain of a climate catastrophe, yet no one is ready to admit it openly. Because of this, a secret project to build generators was put into motion, crossing rough northern waters to reach Site 113, the home of New Liverpool. A crew employed by the Imperial Exploration Company, or the IEC, has been tasked to build the greatest marvel of technology, a steam core generator. The crew of this operation has been lured by the promise of a steady job and were eager to leave the work riots and bread queues plaguing England. En route, the workers were told not to ask for details, and there is really no consensus as to why this contract has such a high priority considering the deteriorating state of the British Empire. But the IEC superiors have reassured the crew that this is the most important job of their lives. Arriving in this soon-to-be New Liverpool, we find a very unusual sight most veteran Frostpunk players aren't used to. Grass, trees, water, and no snow. It's a comfortable 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and things are pretty chill, no pun intended. In the early stages of this scenario, we learn that the Great Freeze is projected to happen, yet not too many people believe it. The workers are only here to get out of the chaos of England and just work. And in the beginning, it's pretty smooth sailing for everyone. While our men are working, we receive word that a sudden frost has devastated a plantation in India, and the population is rising up against the British rule. Now, for context, this scenario takes place in 1886, so at this time, India is still very much under the thumb of the British Empire. The fact that India is already suffering due to global cooling further drives home the point of why everyone is going north. Remember, whatever is happening to the Earth is resulting in a single global minimum all around the world. If it's 50 degrees in England, it'll be 50 degrees in India, as well as the US, France, Brazil, Egypt, etc. The whole world, for whatever reason, is becoming colder. This is significant because the reason why different parts of the world have different temperatures is due to the amount of sunlight a location receives, its height above sea level, how close it is to the sea, and the overall shape of the land. We'll eventually get into theories about why the world is cooling, but one of the prevailing theories we'll learn about in a later episode is that many scientists believe that the Great Freeze is the result of the sun dimming. But even if the sun was dimming, to have everywhere on Earth fall to a single global minimum doesn't make a lot of sense. Parts would be colder, sure, but not everywhere reaching the same temperature. Regardless, we don't exactly know where this generator is being built. I'd place my money on Greenland or Iceland, but I'm not entirely sure. All we know is it's north. Wherever it is, the surrounding area is chock full of useful resources to aid in our development of the steam core generator, and local foliage isn't too greatly impacted by the declining temperatures. Sending our scouts to explore the surrounding area, we uncover some really interesting information. We find remnants of other people. A tavern known as the North Star can be discovered, where the tavern keeps saying, "While the French were around, I had patrons all day long. Workers curing hangovers with breakfast, engineers drinking buckets of coffee over their maps and blueprints, and in the evening, all together working hard on the next hangover. All of them chatting in bloody French. Now it's over. Take what you need. I'm leaving for good." So apparently the English aren't the only ones who headed north. The French are out here doing something as well. Continuing our exploration, we find the graves of 3 Frenchmen, as well as some massive railroad tracks that run from one horizon to the other, with rails almost knee-high and run on wide railroad ties. These tracks can be followed to a small station that apparently looks ridiculous besides these enormous tracks. There is a French station master there who will tell our scouts that all Crève-Neige departures are on hold until further notice. For those of you who don't parle français, Crève-Neige translates to snowbreaker. Speaking of French, we find a sign that reads Minister of the Navy and Colonies Warehouse No. 4, which further establishes the French's large presence here, and we can eventually find a dude who thinks we're French engineers and speaks to us in French. But luckily for you guys, I have a 275-day streak in Duolingo and can translate what he says. "Hello gentlemen, here are your steam cores. Please sign here and here. This should be enough to repair the snowbreaker." Now, you could be a dick and take these, or tell him we're Anglais, which he'll thank us for being honest. We can eventually find a Crève-Neige laying on its side due to the ground giving way under its massive weight. The train is described as being unbelievably huge, like a beached ship. On the main boiler, it reads Crève-Neige No. 12. So clearly, the French's way of beating the Great Freeze is to build giant trains. Later, we can follow these tracks as they disappear under ice, and lose sign of them altogether. Now, I'd be remiss not to mention Snowpiercer, a movie with a very similar concept of the world being frozen and humanity surviving the frost by building a giant train. The Crève-Neige, or Snowbreaker, is most likely a reference to Snowpiercer. Despite the French just Frenching about up here, there are a few other IEC sites scattered about. We learned about Site 107 after it was lost due to a catastrophic accident. Reaching Site 107 to lend aid, we find dozens of coffins. Also, interestingly enough, the woman from the intro video, Effie McLaughlin, is also here. Long story short, the core of their generator exploded after a fire broke out in the final stages of construction. Effie saw this threat coming, but no one listened to her, resulting in many horrendous deaths. Elsewhere, we can investigate the tragedy of Site 120 after the IEC lost contact with them. Nearing the site, we find a runaway workers camp who tells us that Site 120 had inhuman conditions with a slave-driving boss. Reaching the site, we learn it was destroyed by fires and riots. The generator was also nearly complete before it blew up, destroyed by a violent rebellion resulting in mass death. Bodies lie all over Site 120, with most of them being engineers. If we choose to save the Site 120 runaways, they will begin sowing dissent in our camp and reveal themselves to be syndicalists. Now, a syndicalist is someone who subscribes to, guess what? Syndicalism, a political and economic ideology that advocates for the organization of society through decentralized, self-managed labor unions or syndicates. Now, this may sound familiar, so let's quickly run through the differences between syndicalism, socialism, and communism, because that's totally why you guys come to my channel. Anyway. Syndicalists basically advocate for a self-managed labor union to run everything. Socialists generally advocate for a collective ownership of the means of production. Communists also advocate for the collective ownership of the means of production. However, it is typically envisioned as a stateless, classless society where goods and services are distributed according to need. So in essence, they are all very similar, it's just their approaches are different. But with every political ideology, it's all highly complex and impossible to summarize in one paragraph, so let's just move on. Another site we can't encounter personally, but find references to, is Site 157, aka Winterhome. There are some lost crates with valuable resources meant for the construction of Winterhome's generator that we found after a convoy to Winterhome was lost. We can take the supplies and dip before anyone from Winterhome comes looking for them, and while now this may not seem like a big deal, in the next episode, you'll see why this actually has massive ramifications. Returning back to our site and just covering the overall status of England, by the time of the first snowfall, society back in England has broken down. Word got back that most generators won't be operational on time, causing widespread panic. To combat this, the interim government set up a lottery system to see who gets to go. However, the people claim it's rigged. The situation becomes volatile, and the authorities begin to prepare for a riot, which begins not long after as a nationwide food shortage caused people to take to the streets. While our people continuously work day and night to build the generator, riots break out in Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds. As the weather causes more and more crops to fail, this prompts a mass exodus to the colonies. However, as we know, the chaos in the colonies are even worse, as these tropical environments had no way of preparing for this kind of weather. But things get worse as we intercept a letter from the mother of one of our workers telling him that his brother was killed during a demonstration because the government sent mechanized lancers against them. While mechanized lancers sound fucking sick, that's not what stands out to me. The letter states that this demonstration was against forced conscription for the second year of the Balkan War. As I said in the beginning, this scenario takes place in 1886, and the Balkan Wars, at least in our timeline, took place in 1912. So the Balkan War they're referring to is something totally new and completely unknown to us. And speaking of finishing the generator, as we do so, Ebenezer Craven, the new Prime Minister of England, decides to redirect all remaining resources from the generator program instead of making sure they're in tip-top shape. This results in many generators not working properly, being destroyed, or just being abandoned outright. Despite this, the crew working at Site 113 finished the construction of the generator, and the future citizens of New Liverpool can rest easy, knowing all the hard work that these workers put in actually paid off. Hopefully. And that is the backstory of The Last Autumn. But there are a few things we still need to talk about, so let's hop into some theories. So I want to talk about the French.
The French.
The Crève Neige is really interesting to me. A ginormous train meant to safe house the French from the Great Freeze. Not very practical, but I like where your head's at, the French. Anyway, when we reach the end of the tracks, they just disappear under the ice and our people lose sight of them. Now, this either implies that they didn't finish the tracks, or more interestingly, a Crève Neige is actually meant to go underground. Further exploring the land, we can find 2 books left behind in a trapper's cabin. We don't know exactly who was living here, but I bet they were either French or affiliated with the French and supplying the Crève Neige program with food. One of the books left behind in the cabin is On the Origins of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life by Charles Darwin. This is the book that introduced the theory of evolution and laid the foundation for evolutionary biology. The other book that can be found is Voyage au centre de la Terre, or Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. The book follows a German scientist who believes there are volcanic tubes that reach the center of the Earth. He and a few others rappel into an inactive Icelandic volcano, where they journey to the center of the Earth and find all sorts of nifty things. I don't think these books were left here for no reason. I think the Crève Neige is a subterranean train. Maybe it surfaces every once in a while to collect some resources, but it wouldn't surprise me if a Crève Neige is underneath our feet as we're playing other scenarios, traveling through inactive volcanic tunnels or through new tunnels carved by automatons. I think this also hints at the French practicing eugenics, or selective breeding, in order to create a new generation to survive the horrors of the Frostland. In terms of the English, there's not much to theorize about other than the Balkan War. As I said, this version of the Balkan War is nearly 30 years before the real event, so whatever is happening during this war is something totally new. If I were to take a shot in the dark, I'd wager that this conflict is a resource war. Everyone knows that the world is slowly ending, and everyone is trying their best to keep their people alive. Others be damned. Well, most others be damned, because the letter from the worker's mother talks about forced conscription. This, to me, implies that the British Empire knows it doesn't have long and is trying its hardest to gather up as many resources as possible, as quickly as possible, with little to no regard of how many lives it loses in the process. If this Balkan War is indeed a resource war, then I imagine the British Empire is fighting it to the last man in order to finish the generators. Essentially, if we throw thousands of people into the meat grinder, then we have A, fewer mouths to feed, and B, more potential resources to put toward the British Empire prolonged survival. We will hear more discussions about this war in later episodes, but for now, just keep it in the back of your mind. Anyway, the world has now ended. Survivors now flock to these generators with the hope that maybe they could survive. But if these constant troubles during the generator's construction were anything to go by, not all of them are in the best shape. So what happens after one of these generators fails, and you're left out in the cold, with nowhere else to go?